So there's been much discussion about this historic victory for the AfD in Germany, and what this basically means is that the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, has won its first state election, and that is the state of Thuringia, I think it's pronounced. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, Germans. I am English. It's expected that I get language wrong, and it'd be poor form to correct that trend now. But yes, they got 32.8% of the vote in that state, which is well ahead of the second best, the Christian Democrat Union, with 23.6%. So that's quite a significant margin of victory there, isn't it?
It is, and it was specifically with young people. Young people, I think, voted around 37%.
37, 38, something like that, isn't it?
I didn't know that.
I think it's 18 to 24 is actually the bracket where they're doing the best.
Oh.
And the older someone gets, the less likely they are to vote for AfD, which sort of turns on its head the notion that you become more conservative as you get older, because actually it's the other way around, and it's the older people that are ruining everything for the younger people.
I feel like maybe Germany, the boomers in Germany, I think maybe are sort of the worst affected by sort of boomer truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've really, since day one, been hammered with guilt or whatever.
Yes,
like more than anywhere else in the world, perhaps.
If you prioritise the wants and needs of Germany, you're evil, is basically the sentiment behind that, right? But another province that's worth mentioning as well, here is the province of Thuringia. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, sorry. But one I will not mispronounce is this one, Saxony. This is another province where there have been elections going on, and projections from this morning suggest that the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, is going to win, but by a narrow margin. So 31.9%, and the AfD are predicted to get about 30.6 to 30.7%.
This is massive.
Yeah.
It's still very close, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's also worth mentioning as well, the CDU have held this state since the reunification of Germany in 1990.
Yeah.
And since the last election in 2019, the AfD have gained around 3%, whereas the CDU have lost 0.2%.
Yeah, they're a traditional power party, whereas AfD is just rising right now.
It's interesting. I wanted to ask, actually, I don't know if you'd know, but that would clearly have been in East Germany.
Yes.
The other one, Lotharingia. Oh, sorry, Thuringia. Lotharingia. Sorry, only 1,000 years out of date there. Was that in East or West Germany? I sort of guess East Germany, but I don't know. It might not have been. Or...
It's obviously geographically central Germany, but I think it would have still been in the East. I'm sure there'll be some Germans that will say so in the comments.
Yeah, let us know. I would actually.
I am Googling it right now.
We've got a live fact check.
Whether Thuringia was behind the Iron Curtain, and it says it was located in East Central Germany during the Cold War.
There we go.
Yeah, it was part of Soviet-occupied zone of Germany.
So another interesting thing about Saxony is the BSW, which is a left-wing party that actually came out of the former Communist Party in East Germany, but they are anti-immigration as well, and they also did well. I think they came third in Saxony.
I think it was good that they added the W, because otherwise, the BS party doesn't sound good.
Do you know what? I'd be very interested. I've not heard that. I wonder what their actual take is, what their angle is on that. Are they full-blown commies, or are they just socialists?
Socially conservative, but economically socialist.
Okay.
So they're like against giving Ukraine weapons, which I thought was interesting from the left. You do get it though, don't you?
Yeah.
But this is also interesting as well because it's splitting the left-wing vote between multiple different parties, because it's a recent splinter group. And it's also worth mentioning, we have a store and it's selling some t-shirts at the minute. All of the Islander merch that we've been selling, and if you live under a rock, this wonderful magazine, yes, we have t-shirts associated with it. Some of the graphics inside the magazine have been turned into t-shirts, and you'll no longer be able to buy these by the end of the week. So if you would like a nice t-shirt, I personally wear some of these t-shirts outside of the office, just in my daily life, so I do recommend them. And you want to support us, this is a good way of doing so. So I just thought I'd throw that one out there.
Limited edition. In a few years, they'll be worth thousands.
Yeah, there'll be multi-millionaire collectors trying to buy your T-shirt off of you, I'm sure.
As rare as champagne off the Titanic.
And even more sought after. So it's worth mentioning a little bit about the German system, because processing these election results needs some sort of background. So
can I ask, just before you go on, is the guy that won, is it the equivalent of an MP, or is he like a mayor?
So
what is it exactly?
It's the state legislature. I'm actually going to go into explaining this right now.
Okay.
So,
all right, sorry.
That's all right. So Germany has a sort of federal system. It's structured federally, in other words, and this grants a reasonable level of autonomy to its states in areas such as things like education, policing, culture, and infrastructure, and things like that. Not too dissimilar to some, aspects of the UK's system as well. And states also have representation in a federal legislative body that plays a central role in, believe it or not, federal legislation. And these... Is
that like the Reichstag? That what that is then?
Well, it's got its own name that's distinct from that. There's obviously the national parliament, but there's also federal ones. But anyway, these elections are also very significant in setting the tone of the national elections, because, of course, these elections are ongoing, and, the best way of predicting what happens in a national election is looking at what happened in these state elections. And they're also a proving ground for policies at a national level. So the fact that the AfD have got their foot in the door and they can start saying, look, we can have results here. Our policies actually do work. That is if, things go well, of course, then that is quite important as well. So each of the 16 states in Germany holds elections for their state parliament, and this usually happens every 5 years, although some hold them every 4 years. They're allowed to do that, such as Bremen, and therefore not every single state has one at once. It's also worth mentioning that these are held using a proportional voting system, which means that if a party is to assume the position of the state government, they will usually have to be in coalition with another party. So does that answer what you were pretty much going to ask?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So what is important is that Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, is urging German parties to exclude the AfD,
of course they are.
From any coalitions to prevent them from being able to form governments, basically. And he belongs to the Social Democratic Party, which are obviously opposed to the AfD. Need I say that?
He's going to pull a Macron.
Yeah, there are parallels, and I did think to mention Macron, actually, that Macron aligned himself in France with the left to try and keep the right out, and it seems to be that a similar thing is going on in Germany as well. However, it may be difficult in the future for parties like his to actually secure places in government, because with the rise of the AfD and also the BSW on the left splitting the right and left vote, the majorities are going to be much less, and there might be more coalitions, not less, in which case the party may simply say, well, actually, we do want to be in government, and therefore we will go in coalition with one of these parties, even though they're being gate-kept out of power.
I don't think that the notion of a coalition is irreparably bad in this case, so long as there is a minimum amount of agreement on some things, like open borders policies and stuff. Reject them,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that the entire German system's founded on collaboration in terms of political parties, isn't it? So there's a certain inevitability to it. But if they all agree amongst themselves to keep the AfD out, that is a kind of underhanded way of minimising their political influence. But it's also an act of desperation, because they're not doing that to other political parties. They go into coalition with potentially competitors.
Yeah,
I heard it said back in the Merkel days, a number of times when they worried that the AfD might win one tiny thing, all of them would say openly, "Yeah, we will do anything. We will form any coalition, any combination of any parties to make sure they don't get a sniff of power."
Yeah, it's ridiculous,
at all costs,
isn't it?
And of course, that has actually been played out with Macron recently, where you mentioned Macron. So yeah, they'll do that in Germany. 100%
we're going to
they'll
look
do
at
that.
some examples in Germany in a minute, but
can I say one thing before we do this?
Yeah, of
so
course.
Macron also risks being impeached now.
Does he?
Yeah.
Right.
So it doesn't work
fingers
well
crossed.
for him.
Yeah,
So
fingers crossed.
the media have also been carrying water for this. So what is interesting about this headline from Politico? German far-right wins first major election since World War II. Why is World War II significant in this instance? Oh, right, they're trying to suggest that there's some sort of ideological through line between the National Socialist Party of the mid-century Germans, the Moustache Man, and the AfD, aren't they? That's what they're trying to do by association. But of course, they can't outrightly just say these people are, you know, they're armband enthusiasts. They're not going to say that, are they? Because that might be libelous. And so they're using methods like this to try and basically smear them as much as they possibly can.
That's
and
a funny one I haven't heard before. Armband
I
enthusiasts.
just came up with it on the
quite
spot,
funny.
actually.
Very good.
Also, the Times here, Germany far right has first big win since Nazis. The Times being very explicit there in their association. Of course, this isn't the case, and we're going to be looking at what the AfD actually advocates for soon enough. And in the past, they've been designated as extremists, and interestingly enough, the two regions where they were designated extremists are the two where they've done the best. Saxony-Anhalt, of course Saxony, and Thuringia. So they've come first in a province in which they were designated an extremist group. Shows how much that designation is worth, doesn't it?
Power of Streisand.
Yeah, it also shows that a lot of people right now are not trusting the establishment, and they see it this way. So if the establishment, however we define it, constantly demonizes one party, and people think that the establishment doesn't promote their interests, they're gonna start becoming very interested in that party.
Well, I think also people are losing faith in institutions more generally because they realise that institutions are made up of people. Yeah. People can be biased and be politically partisan.
I don't know if I agree entirely on this, because we cannot but have institutions. I think that,
well, of course, but
they're
it's
a bit
simply that
selective.
they've lost their sort of. People used to believe that they could do no wrong, and I think that they've come to a more realistic perspective.
So I think in many ways Germany is sort of a more accelerated version of Britain in all sorts of senses. One, that they've been deracinated and gaslit more than we have, been guilt-tripped more than we have, and also flooded with Syrians and Afghans and everything more than we have. Right, so I feel like they are a bit further down the road than we are, in most senses.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the case.
And like the Brits, not actually inclined to get angry and go mad and riot and stuff. Not actually inclined that way, naturally or anything. Yes, but
they tend to be quite civil in their society.
Right, yeah, extremely civil. Right, it takes a lot before they sort of go berserk. But they've been pushed harder, perhaps the hardest in Europe or Western Europe.
I would say so, yeah.
And there definitely is a limit to how much people can be pushed.
Sure, of course,
almost certainly,
always a limit.
So there's also this as well, which hasn't helped the media representation. So this is, I'm going to mispronounce his name, sorry, Bjorn Höcke? I don't know, but that's the best guess.
Umlauts.
Excuse me?
I think it's Bjorn Höcke.
Okay.
Thank you,
told me.
Stelios.
Yeah, sorry if I mispronounce it.
You've got Brits and Greeks, I'm afraid. But Stelios, you did a bit of German, didn't you? But anyway, he was the chair, and still may well be, of the AfD in Thuringia, and he was found guilty of intentionally deploying a slogan used by the Nazi Party's paramilitary wing, which is the SA. And what that was everything for Germany, which doesn't sound like one of the worst ones to me. But yes, Germany has very strict laws and this sort of thing. You know, you can't do the Roman salute and things like that. There are lots of laws that have been put in place to prevent this sort of thing. And this is a very easy thing that people can point to and say, look, see, they are the same. But it could... He just claims it was an honest mistake. I don't know. I'd be quite surprised if you grew up in Germany and you didn't know the association of that slogan. But even so, I still think people should be free to say it if they want to.
It's that classic thing where we're in the point where any patriotism, any nationalism, even very, very weak milquetoast nationalism, any tip of the cap to nationalism is Well, that's what the NSDAP were. That's what Hitler was.
Yeah.
So you can't do. You're the same as Hitler. You want concentration camps because you don't hate your own country. I mean, that's where we are, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's pretty flagrant as well, the way in which they're going about it. It's so in your face that even to your normal person, they might, hang on a minute, maybe, you know, my country isn't so bad. And I think that it doesn't really resonate with ordinary people in a way that they would hope. But it is worth mentioning as well, the AFD's manifesto is now available. You don't need a VPN anymore and setting it to Germany to be able to read it, and it's also in English. So if you are curious about what they believe, here it is. So I've previously pointed out, I think in a segment with you, Stelios, that their views on democracy and their sort of core values, which is chapter 1 of their manifesto, like they want a leaner government, they want less big government, they want a greater separation of powers. Hang on,
Are you sure,
Samson?
Are you sure, Josh?
So yeah, they
are we going to get banned just for mentioning it?
Limit the influence and power of political parties.
It's so radical.
They want free elections of candidates. They want to curtail lobbyism. I mean, this doesn't sound like the actions of the NSDAP, does it?
Where's the mention of Lebensraum?
Yeah, it's funny that. But yes, there is a reasonable section on immigration here. No regular immigration, sort of talking about asylum, immigration from other EU countries. It's all pretty normal stuff. The AFD, to my mind, look like a classically liberal party. To call them far right or hard right or extreme right or even national socialist is so far off the mark from what they're putting forward that it's ridiculous.
I'll read it and see if there's any mentioning of the word Übermensch.
There's not.
Okay.
So it's also worth mentioning polling at the minute. This is the national parliament voting intention. So the AFD are polling second, and the CDU is still pretty static. This is just over the course of, a few months, really, a year or so. And I don't see them necessarily closing the gap here. However, they may be able to drag the CDU rightwards and get some concessions in terms of immigration, perhaps. We'll have to see how it goes, because they are also trying to persecute them, obviously.
It started with them. It started in 2015 with Merkel, who I think was in CDU.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right, yeah.
Also, foreshadowing my segment. Do you really trust what Politico is telling us here?
Not really, but a lot of the polls seem to be indicating similar things, and I think that there is a reasonable cohort of people that are still voting for the CDU. And it's also worth mentioning this. If we can zoom out a little bit from this, Samson, I don't have the means to do so. So this is Saxony, of course, one of the states that we talked about where the AFD narrowly lost out. So the AFD are that blue line there, and the CDU are that black line there. We can see since 1994 all the way to 2024, over the past 30 years, that the CDU have been on a trend of decline, and it looks like since September of 2014, the AFD have been on the rise. And it's to the point now where it looks like the two lines are going to intersect and the AFD are going to take over in the future, if you're taking this sort of long view of German politics. And I think that this actually might be what other people have been looking at in the sort of German regime, if you will, and saying, hang on a minute, if we let this carry on, the AFD are only going to continue to gain, so we need to act now to keep them out, otherwise they're going to continue to be a thorn in our side, basically, and upset our plans. But this sort of indicates some sort of positive change in Germany, that people are moving towards the AFD to alternative right-wing parties rather than the establishment ones, which is promising.
And we have to mention, if we take this into account, and I think that there is some plausibility to it, that in a space of 10 years, because it's September 14 and now it's September 24, they nearly tripled their numbers. From a 10%, they're around to 30%.
Yes.
Yeah. So
even if the trend slows down, it's still pretty strong, isn't it?
It is. I mean, tripling your electoral base in 10 years, it's an important thing. It's an achievement.
No, that's a good observation. Yeah.
And also, I read a lot of people who claim to be surprised, and they're saying, you know, oh, the AFD is rising. Yeah, it's rising because of the policies that the EU is promoting the last 10 years. And then no wonder.
Yeah, if you control immigration and stop suicidal green energy policy, that's how they're going to stop the far right, as they call it.
You cannot love the cause and hate the effect. I mean, that's how it goes. If you're a rational human being.
It's also interesting to see between about 2014 and 16 or 17 that the CDU fall off the cliff a bit, or they rebound at the same time as the AFD get a spike. What happened? Something happened in around then. Was that when Germany started realising that they'd been flooded by economists?
I'm not entirely sure. It might be what happened around that time.
Well, wasn't it when Merkel? When was it when Merkel opened the doors and just let in 1 million Syrians?
I
in one
think
go?
It could be, yeah.
End
actually.
of 15.
Yeah, yeah, that could be it. But anyway, the final thing I wanted to end on is that Brandenburg is set to have its election on the 22nd of September, and the AFD are now leading the polls. So this is something to pay attention to, because it could be that gradually the AFD are going to start taking over state governments. And this is significant as well because, of course, Brandenburg surrounds Berlin, and it'd be very symbolic to take that province, I think. And so, yes, some positive news. Obviously, keep an eye on the persecution of the AFD, because I think they are a perfectly legitimate political party. I think they have a right to exist. They seem to me to be classically liberal, with some socially conservative policies. Certainly not, they're not national socialists. Very far from it. And I hope they do well. I hope it all goes well for Germany, because I don't think the German people deserve what has been imposed upon them.
One thing to mention, about a year ago now, I suppose, something like that, I interviewed Peter Boehringer. Remember that at all? So that's on.
Of course, yeah.
He's one of the chairman of. He's one of the vice chairman of AFD. I think they've got loads of vice chairmen.
It's worth mentioning. We've spoke to a few people from the AFD over the years, haven't we, on our website? So if you want to check those out,
and he's a
worth
perfectly reasonable, rational, completely normal. Dare I say, even milquetoast. I was far too extreme for him. I was saying stuff, and he was like, "Oh, can't say that." So. They're normal guys. They just don't want to see their country utterly annihilated from within, right? That's all they are.
Absolutely. I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast to the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, we also do videos on our website. Here we're talking about how the state kills dissidents, and if you want to see all the other work we're putting out, you can follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.